people like Elvis were legally able to come along, watch you perform, and then go and recreate that music and then put it out themselves and not give proper credit where credit is due.
Mm-hmm. So can we go right back to the beginning?
Yes.
What role did radio play in sort of your early years? What do you remember of like your early days listening to the radio?
Early days in Canada.
Well, you could tell me like what were the early days in Jamaica like listening to the radio?
So let's see. I was there till I was 10. So strangely enough, you'd think radio would be consumed by reggae music all the time when you're not from Jamaica, but Jamaicans are really into all kinds of music. Pop music, soul, R&B. So back on the radio, I used to listen to a lot of that actually, because you could hear the local reggae music from the sound systems. You didn't need the radio for that. Every day the music was just pounding and pounding from different blocks, right? But then when it came to the radio, which was a lot of AM radio and FM, we'd be able to tune in to the American stations from maybe Florida or just the southern part of the U.S. They would leak into Jamaica. So you'd hear stuff like, the Beatles and the Temptations, some Elvis Presley. I remember hearing, just memorable songs that are more poppy and almost rocky, but not necessarily urban or black at that time. We didn't have a sense of, belief in our own Jamaican music at the time, so it was still kind of suppressed in the underground, so you didn't hear a lot of that on the radio.
So then when you go to Canada and you're 10 when you moved to Canada, right? Mm-hmm. Like what's the experience like then? Because I have to imagine there's not a black-owned radio station at that point either.
No such thing.
No. So you wouldn't have heard of that, and you also wouldn't have the sound systems. You wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear reggae and dancehall coming from that in Toronto as well. Like, what was your experience of listening to the radio in Canada when you got here?
Well, when I got here, it was like 1972, 73. And strangely enough, as a Jamaican who loves music, not just one kind of music, I was like a kid in a candy store. It was like Canada represented to be a melting pot of all different kinds of music, which I was so happy just to get away from listening to reggae all the time, because my uncle was a reggae DJ, so I had the sound system in my house, right? So I'd wake up to it and go to bed to it every day. So when I came here, it was like a discovery of a whole bunch of different kinds of music. And I used to listen to 1050 Chum and 680, which was like, I think, CFTR at the time, and I'd look forward to like the top 100 countdowns at the end of the year, and it would be mostly rock and pop music, Caucasian music, white people's music, hardly any black music leaking into the top 100. I'd been, one song maybe out of the top 100 would be black artists, but it didn't matter to me. I quickly got absorbed. You got to understand, when I went to school in 72, 73, you were like the only black kid in your public school, maybe one of 4 black people in your junior high school.
You were.
And then, yes, and other people in my position in that year in the Toronto area, right?
Yeah.
So it represented the market for consumption at the time. If there wasn't a demand for it, then people would feel no way about being obligated to produce it. But as years went by, the Jamaican, West Indian black population in the whole metropolis kept growing and growing, and with that came a greater demand to give us the music that we like, that we want.
But that being said, I heard a story about you that you started like a DIY radio station when you were in high school. Is that
Absolutely,
right? Can you tell me that?
Yes. Well, being a music enthusiast and a DJ at the time, I had the Fantastic Voyage DJ service, so we did high school dances.
This is before, like, when you were in high school, didn't you start a radio station? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was grade 12 and grade 13.
Okay.
And Victoria Park High School. So we had this spot called the Cafe, the Jet Fac, where I took theater arts. So it was like a nice room like this, with lights and this upper booth that had glass, and you could look down on this area. And to me, it seemed like, a great opportunity to put a mock radio station in it. All my friends at this time were into music. Like, we're a very musical culture at that time.
Yeah.
People were into their new wave, their pop, a little bit of reggae, a little bit of this. But I thought, all these guys are so talented. maybe I could talk the school into having a mock radio station operate from that same facility. And they said, okay. So all it took was moving in a pair of turntables, an amplifier, and lots of speaker wires running all the way down from one end of the school to the other into the cafeteria. And then there we would mount some big speakers in the caf. So every morning, every lunch, after school, we'd have these same guys, these, musical geniuses, play DJs and pipe the music into the cafeteria. And it was, it's probably what got me into Ryerson, actually, because in my interview, that came up, and I think they were very impressed that I had the ambition to do that. But yeah, it was my first little taste of what was to come.
So then how does Fantastic Voyage start? Because that was on 88.1 FM. That's the Ryerson. At the time, that was the Ryerson radio station, right?
Yeah, it was called something else in 83 first. Forget the name of it.
The name of the show wasn't Fantastic Voyage?
No. So the name of my disc jockey service in grade 13 and 12 was Fantastic Voyage disc jockey service. But when I first went to Ryerson, the station was not interested in black music. They were very new wave and punk and on the ground. But because I was a first-year student there, I did get a job there. But I was under pressure to play music that I didn't identify with, right?
Right,
and
they wanted you to play pop
sneak in
and
my
rock
own little funk and, early Grandmaster Flash and stuff like that.
Wow.
So after a while, it didn't work. They let me go because I didn't fit the programming schedule. But I kept knocking on the doors, wanting a show there in any way, shape, or form. And one day, it was John Jones and Anthony Leo, the program director, station manager. They called me and said, Ron, you can have a show now, and you can play the music you want. And that was a turning point. That's when I gave it a title, the Fantastic Voyage program. So that was late 1983, because I was there at Ryerson from 83 to 85. And that was when the show started and eventually transformed from being a show that played funk and rap, because this was before the term hip-hop became commercialized.
Yeah.
And then it later became the hip-hop show that it was. Maybe Canada's first hip-hop radio show.
When did hip-hop start getting into the mix? Like when did
next year's supposed to be the 50th anniversary of hip-hop, right? So it's in your head, really. But 1979, it was rap. That's when Rapper's Delight came out, right? Yeah. And then as years went on, I would say by around 1983, 84 at the latest, that's when the term hip-hop became popularized and we understood what we had.
Was it hard to get the records?
From a living in Toronto point of view, yes.
Yeah, was it hard to get those early Grandmaster Flash
It's American
records?
culture, yeah. It was hard in the sense that if you weren't there on the scene, on the edge at the time, then you were not in the record stores every weekend when the records were imported. So I was always in the record stores. I'd literally be there when they're putting the records on the shelves. And in that stage, you buy everything. You don't even listen to the record. As soon as you see the label and it's from New York and it has any kind of a credible artist that you've heard of but you've never seen, you only dream of, you buy those records as an early DJ. And you end up playing those records twice sometimes because at this stage, there's not enough rap music to buy in Toronto. So phase 2 now is you have to go to New York. You have to dig into the crates in those record stores that you've heard of that are, hidden in Brooklyn or, like in some crazy place in another territory of New York, and you have to spend hours there, and you don't even know what you're buying sometimes, but you're in a space where there's other DJs who do the same thing. They spend time and they're looking through the crates. And I remember there's one song that Sunshine Sound used to play called We Come to Take Control. Yeah. And that was the hardest record for any DJ to find in Canada. And I was the happiest kid when I looked through the crates and I'm like, wow, look at this. Amazing. It was like a glory moment.
So you were going to New York to find these records too? Like you were traveling
Absolutely.
down?
Yeah. I went to every record store and went to New York several times to buy records, and...
You took it really seriously.
You didn't know you took it seriously. You were doing what you loved, right? Being a DJ was amazing at the time. It was, you played over big sound systems. It's not like now where, everybody's a DJ now. But back then, to be a DJ who was kind of, pushing black music the way it deserved to be pushed was a special thing. And if you were supposed to be there, then you didn't know it was work when it came to going and getting records and just being on the edge and being at the jams and understanding culture and just wanting more and more of it all the time. It was a beautiful time. That's why we called it the golden era, man. There's nothing else that's come along like it since.
Well, like, was there a moment, because like the story you're telling me up to this point is you were playing a lot of funk and you were playing a lot of reggae and you were listening to a lot of funk and you were listening to a lot of reggae within black music. Like, was there a moment you heard a hip hop tune and you go like, holy shit, like this is something else. I've never heard anything like this before. Or did it just kind of creep in?
No, I would say I got overwhelmed by the combination of everything. I mean, every year there would be a highlight in terms of getting a new song that struck me a certain way, because there was a lot of great music that was being made at the time. I'd say more than songs making a shift in how you feel, it was the artists that came in that created the shift.
Yeah.
The artists at some points were bigger than the song in terms of the momentum and the evolution of hip-hop over the years. For example, when Run DMC came in, they were game changers, right? We'd never seen anything like it before. And years later, Boogie Down Production, Eric B. and Rakim, each artist represented a different phase, a different era. Salt and Pepper, the same thing. Later on, we get the Eminems and the Drakes, etc. But those represent shifts in the whole movement of hip hop. When those artists came in, everything changed that came before them.
Did you have a favorite song back then? Did you have a favorite hip hop song back then? Come on.
I like the Audio 2, Top Billin', for some strange reason. That's still one of my favorite songs to this day. I just love the way that it's produced. And Public Enemy's Rebel Without a Pause.
Yeah,
that was a song that it has this bug sound in it, and that sound got to me. It was like being on crack when you heard that song, man. It just made you want to bug out on the dance floor. It's like this backward scream that goes throughout the whole song. And I think it hypnotized me, because that's the song that made me love Public Enemy. Everything else didn't matter. And I kept pushing that song and pushing it and pushing it. Brothers and sisters, what's this world coming to? And then, boom,
Yeah.
You don't see Ron Nelson dance a lot, but I used to dance when that song came on the dance floor and push it on people.
You weren't just playing hip-hop from the States, though. You were also spotlighting local Toronto hip-hop acts. The Maestro, Dream Warriors, Mishi Me. How do you describe that era of Toronto's independent rap scene?
How can I describe it? Innocent. We did not know ourselves. We didn't understand our identity at the time. We were giving more love to American rappers and American culture, not because we didn't love our own culture, but we didn't understand what our culture was at the time. We were still searching for identity. So during that time, I was there. I was hanging out with all the guys because I had a recording studio in my house. So all these hip-hop artists came to me, and we wouldn't just make music, but we would talk and have conversation, right? And when it came to gangster rapping, for example, one of the questions we joke around was, yo, you're making gangster rap, but you're not a real gangster. Whereas those guys in New York are real gangsters. They're not real. Yeah, they are. Those lyrics are real. They really do kill people and shoot people and stuff like that. And then, so we'd have this fascination about American culture without really understanding it ourselves. So in a way, we were kind of following fashion, following a trend. We didn't have a sense at that point in time of setting the trends. So the early artists were very much under influence of what they heard in American culture.
Right.
And we had one thing that was different, though. We had a little bit of West Indian twang to our sound. We had a little bit of a more West Indian identity. America absorbs you, so you become an American West Indian. But in Canada, you still had a chance to be West Indian Canadian, or a Canadian where you can still keep your own identity. So people like Mishi Me and MC Rumble, what's different about them? They put a little reggae, a little dancehall, a little twang in their a little patois in their sound, and that made them stand out. That's what made them distinct. That's what made them different.
Did you know it was different back then? Did you have any idea that our thing is different?
Absolutely, because you saw it when you saw the events and you went to the concerts. When we saw that we were capable of representing in hip-hop and playing our part and doing our part, and we had an audience now, because the concerts were now, at least the ones that I was doing, were not just featuring American artists, but we had Canadian artists open. And at some point we had them battle, right? And when you see the reaction and you look at the demographics of the audience that attended, you saw in the beginning a very colored audience, a very black audience, and an audience that came from the poorest parts of Toronto. They came from the ghettos, the region, the Flemingtons, the Jane and Finch, the jungles, and these areas maybe didn't like each other very much, but guess what? The music united them because they would, put away the bull crap at that point in time and just love music because they couldn't find it anywhere else. So before we had to listen to it, but now as more West Indians were populating Toronto, we were going out and congregating amongst ourselves where it was still black music and it was mostly black people attending. So you would see the reactions and you would see the love and you would see the response and you would hear the cheers and you would know as a DJ or as a promoter what's moving the people at the time. So you could see it coming.
How did you end up being a concert promoter in the first place? Like, how did you end up going from being a DJ to a concert promoter?
No qualification whatsoever. It was more of a pressure from the telephone lines at CKLN that used to feature people calling in wanting to hear their favorite songs. But now they didn't have a representative bringing these artists to them in concert. So they didn't care whether or not Rod Nelson was qualified. They made it a demand that I started bringing these artists to town, and
really,
I spoiled it. That's an actual fact.
Yeah,
okay.
People were calling, being like, "I don't care if you don't promote concerts. You were playing these art. You're the only person playing these artists. You got to bring them in."
There was no other black people in a position at that time that was trying to champion the music. Right? There were black people making noise and stuff like that. We had Much Music and Electric Circus, stuff like that, but no one was living on the streets. And I'm telling you right now, in order to be qualified to do what I did, you had to live on the streets. I woke up and lived hip hop and rap all day. You can't be inside sitting behind a desk. You have to be out there talking to people, going to the jams, spending time making flyers and buying records and hearing other DJs play and going to other people's show to really get a sense of the market and then be on top of it at the same time. So I started doing concerts in my bedroom at my mom's house. That was my office. And the first phone call would wake me up out of bed, and then I'd still be in my friggin' underwear and T-shirt for the next 2 hours because I wouldn't have a chance to take a shower, because guess what? Cara Lewis is on the phone from New York, and she's talking to me about bringing Ice-T or Queen Latifah or whatever it is. And at this point in time, America has no respect for Canada because there hasn't been any players before trying to do what I'm doing. So they're kind of feeling me out at the same time. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the credibility to them. They wanted to break artists. Yeah. So it was in their best interest to have their artists travel to Canada. A lot of their artists on their roster had never been to Canada. So when I brought them, it was the first time. So over time, a trusting relationship had to happen. And that's how I just kept doing concerts. It cost me a lot of years of my life because for a lot of it, I couldn't work at a regular job. You know what I mean? I had to get investors at some point. I had to borrow money from people and then pay them back afterwards. I had guys like Mastermind, DJ X, DJ Power, all of these guys and their girlfriends would be guys that we would have in my little Toyota driving from intersection to intersection in the whole city with Scotch tape and wallpaper glue and brushes and a bucket. And our job to promote every show was to plaster every lamp pole at every major intersection from east to west. So we'd go from Finch and Weston Road, let's say, all the way to Markham and Finch, and then go down and do Shepherd East all the way to Shepherd West, and then Lawrence East to Lawrence West. Like, we'd map out the whole 2,000 posters. And back then, there wasn't any, YouTube or Instagram. Like, we had no other way to advertise other than to put a flyer into your hand. So it became my life. I didn't know what was in store. I got suckered into doing promotions, basically, but I'm a pleaser. I like to please people. So when they wanted it, and I look around and said, nobody else is trying to do it. And if they are trying to do it, their credibility is not good because some of these shows that were promised weren't delivered. And people would lose money and walk away with disappointment. I saw that as a step back for the movement of the scene. So I came along, my track record was almost perfect. I delivered everything that I said I would.
What's your favorite memory from a show back then?
I know I have a few memories, but I missed a lot of my shows, unfortunately. As an organizer, a one-man band, he couldn't. But
there got to be one. There got to be one.
Watch a show.
There got to be a moment that you remember, like a favorite moment from one of these shows.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but when Bismarck he came up here to battle, I believe it was in 1986. I believe I got chills in my body when I saw, this is Bismarck, right? I'm like, to me, he's like, one of the gods in hip hop, and here he is on the stage. But it's like World Cup, he's an American going up against a Canadian because it was Battle of the Human Beatboxes. So when I saw him perform, and I saw New York in Canada basically because he was giving it, R.I.P. Bismarck, he was just giving it as all the way that hip hop was supposed to be. Real street, real authentic. If you saw Biz looked like diabolical, his eyes were twisted.
Yeah.
He's got spit coming out of his mouth when he's rapping.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy that would mug you if you're walking late at night in New York, right? But at this point, he's just fueled by hip hop. He's giving it his all in front of an audience. He loved being an entertainer, and now he's spitting lyrics and rapping and battling. His track pants are like basically falling down to his friggin' knees, but everyone's like cheering, and that's how kind of that pants below the waist look that a lot of guys do now. Yeah. He was doing it back then. New York was a little ahead of her time. So, and there's a connection to that memory too, because it shows you the innocence of the time, because I don't think Bismarck had ever left America before, because he had to drive in from Buffalo. I flew them to Buffalo, and then we usually, to save money, right? We drive them through the border, and he didn't like the immigration officer at the border giving him a hard time and stuff like that. So I just remember him standing his ground and saying, "Yo, I don't care, man. I'll send for my pops. My pops will come and get me." He didn't know where he was. He didn't realize how far away he really was. And at that point in time, I had to plead and beg the immigration officials to let him through and say, "Look, these guys are from New York. They don't really understand what it's like to travel and stuff like that." And so eventually everything was cool. But that was really one of the memories I know that I'll cherish, because it literally put chills down my spine.
You made it a point, as you mentioned, to spotlight local rap acts on your radio show and at your concerts as well. And you're telling me a couple of stories so far about what it was like to watch people come up from New York and battle Canadian rappers. So there's this legendary battle I wanted to ask you about. It's between a young Michie Mee and Sugar Love. from New York, a fellow female battler. What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember it was hard to get a really popular female rapper. A lot of people didn't know who Sugar Love was. But I had to trick people in order to get them to battle. I wasn't completely honest in telling them, "Hey, I'm booking you for a battle." I'm booking you to come to Canada for a show. And then you tell them it's a battle afterwards. But I remember Sugar Love had the sportsmanship to say, "Okay, it's a battle, sure, I'll come." She was just happy to get a gig,
right,
to get out of America at the time to come into Canada. But I remember that Michie Mee, she had a little secret weapon there, and you touched on it before, but it's like the home team advantage, okay? When you look at the demographics of the audience, they're not just black people or rap people, there's West Indian people, and the Americans don't have that West Indian twang to this day. There's no loyalty to it, sorry. Mm-hmm. So when it was Michie Mee's turn to rhyme and battle, she would draw back for that Jamaican patwa, right?
Yeah.
And she does it really good, and that's what took her to victory that night. The fact that she could incorporate that.
Did you know she was going to win when you
Nobody knew who would win. Again, we're fascinated by American culture, right? So they were expected to win. It's just like, again, Canada World Cup. We were the underdogs. We're there to learn. We're there to benefit from the experience. And my whole frustration, again, was that Canada's got the talent, but it's not getting exposed deservingly and properly. So that's why the battle came into effect, was if we have these artists battle, then we're going to make world news, and then they're going to have respect for Canada. And I think some of that was achieved.
So this is something I've been curious about with you for a long time. You eventually turned your focus to reggae and dancehall, kind of where we started, right? We started with talking about you with reggae and dancehall. You did, as you mentioned earlier, kind of pass the reins of your radio show over to a very young DJ X and DJ Mastermind, who became really important, pioneering hip-hop broadcasters in Toronto and in Canada in their own right. But I think there's a big part of your story that I've always been curious about, which is there seems to be this part of the article, which is at some point Ron Nelson turned away from hip hop. Why? What prompted that?
Let's see. I had lost a decade and a half of my life. I bought a house. I lost my house. You know, the reason I bought a house was just to have a recording studio in it. I was not thinking progressively. Other people are buying houses now and having families and thinking about their future and stuff like that. I realized I had been out there on the streets beating it out for years had gone by, a decade had gone by, and I've never had a decent job. You know, up until that point, I'd never been employed. So I'm there hustling on the street legally without selling drugs and stuff like that, but I'm still watching other people around me grow up, and I'm not growing up. So I recognize some of that. I'm like, I need to make a decision here about my future. And at the same time, hip-hop had become commercialized. I felt to some degree I had done my work and I had done my part, and it was time for other people to grow up and do their parts. And there's one other factor too. Hip-hop is very youth-oriented. It belongs to young people. I was getting older, so the X generation, the Mastermind generation, the DJ Power generation, the Thrust generation, all those kids, the Mishi Me, the Maestros, the Rumblin' Strongs, you know, they wanted to have their turn now. And the most unselfish thing I could do is say, here, it's the right thing. So I basically passed on the baton. I was so busy doing so many things at once. As I said, recording studio engineer and promoter and DJ and on top of it, radio broadcaster. And it just went on and on. You had to do so many things at once. It was almost a relief to say, okay, you guys take it on. So then after a while, I noticed that my attraction for music was not just for hip hop or reggae. It was for underground. It was for something that was raw, something that was still like a hidden gem, a diamond
unfiltered
in the
by
rough
the mainstream kind of thing. Yeah.
So you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now that's what dancehall became to me, because dancehall came a lot from the same place that hip hop came when hip hop first birthed, but then hip hop changed its whole meaning afterwards. So hip hop had nothing to do after a short period of time with you know, trying to get messages out of New York that was publicizing what a devastating place it was in terms of poverty and all that stuff. It wasn't message music anymore, right? It became bling music, basically. People are now rapping about how much money they had and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. So
that didn't feel pure to you. That didn't feel...
No, I'm old school. So that was totally... I almost missed the transition. So those guys came in at the right time. They could take care of that from now on. But I'm more of a conscious black person, right? So I like where hip-hop came from. That generation, they don't have that sense of consciousness. They don't see color as much. It's not as important to them. The Public Enemies and BDP eras were very short as a result of that. They lasted 2 or 3 years. But so as hip-hop became commercialized, dancehall in Toronto especially was new. It was exciting. The artists were new and exciting. I saw a lot of parallels between hip-hop and reggae. We had dancehall people come from the same place in Toronto that hip-hop people are coming from, right? And sometimes you couldn't even tell them apart. And I found that the struggle was still there. That innocence that I was telling you about, the poverty and stuff, dancehall can relate to everything that early hip-hop people could relate to. And then there is the music itself, the bass, that thumping bass was another common denominator between that funk and early hip hop that I like and dancehall. And it was very easy to kind of switch over. At one point in time, the last Saturday of every month of my radio show, it was every Saturday from 1 to 4, it was all dancehall. And I was waiting for people to kind of say, what the hell are you doing? But nobody did. People liked it because dancehall now was the next thing.
Right.
And eventually I got so absorbed in it that one day David Kingston, who did the top reggae show in CKLN, he left the station and the program director had me filling in from when he wasn't there the odd time before. And eventually they gave me that show, and that's how Reggae Mania Radio was born.
Yeah.
So that became like the next 10 years for me, doing sound clashes and
Yeah, well, let's that's great. I mean, let's stay on that for a second, because there's a couple of things you mentioned. So there was that becomes Reggae Mania. You also told me the story that when you first started at Ryerson Radio, you had tried to play funk and tried to play black music, and you didn't fit into the programming of the radio station, so they don't want you there, and then you have to kind of fight your way back to the door, and you end up having this, like, by the way, unbelievably influential radio show. But since the 80s and the 90s, we've seen the first two black-owned radio stations in Canadian history make a name for themselves. You got Flow 93.5 FM, and you have G 98.7 FM. That's 20 years combined of black ownership. So G 98.7 recently became Flow 98.7. But just broadly, like, what are your thoughts on the legacy of black-owned radio in Canada? Big question.
No, I'm right in there with that question. I mean, I studied radio and television in Ryerson, and there is some value to having a degree in that, even though when those stations formed, the one thing I was disappointed in was nobody there had a broadcasting degree. They chose to, I guess, have a league of broadcasters that represent a different mindset. So they took the best MCs and DJs from our DJ street culture and put them on the radio. That's been a mistake with urban radio for the last 20 years, is they have not sought to get personalities who can come from a radio point of view. That's what they're good at, not being the guy in the mic saying, yeah, cut it up, you know what I mean? So it's, in a way, that's okay. You can kind of say, look, we don't want to be like the generations before. I think also Canadian radios is a little gutless, commercial radio, that is, only because I think and it's a very Canadian characteristic, but we are followers instead of leaders. I don't know what artists I can say that Canadian radio's ever broken, but American break their artists all the time.
Including the break of Canadian artists.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. We break more American artists than we do our own artists. Yeah. No radio station programmers to currently, if you're a program director at a radio station that has an ability to squeeze in more black music, then I haven't seen anyone really take a lead and say, I'm going to stand behind this artist or that artist because they're really good, and they know it in their heart that they can use their power to influence and change the demographic and create more sales and create a superstar out of Canada. I mean, Flow was great for Drake, right? I mean, it's not kind of narrow like that, but if you remember the days of Flow in their first 10 years, they played more Drake than any, and partly because they were obliged to play Canadian content, right? But it's got to be more than Drake that's out there. Yeah. So I think radio should have a responsibility, commercial radio should have a responsibility to try and have a little more gut and be like the American radio stations that have a sense of instinct and intuition and gamble and take chances with their programming instead of following somebody else's trend.
But to my point, those 20 years, that's quite a legacy those stations left.
Is it, though?
You tell me.
To me, it's a legacy of disappointment. What did it all mean? Their ratings were lousy, right? We always get stuck with the bottom of the barrel, and we weren't given a gift with 93.5 because 93.7 was right beside it. That was WBLK. That was our black music station, even though it was American, right? So when 93.5 came in, it knocked out WBLK, but guess what? It still wasn't a very strong signal that everybody could listen to in all the different areas of Toronto.
Right.
And it's the same now with the new flow that we have right now. I live in Scarborough, so sometimes you hit McCowan or Markham Road, you start hearing the CBC interfering with flow. So again, you don't get a good opportunity to really put a value in whether people are behind that station properly, because we've been shortchanged a little bit with what we've gotten. But as black people, we have to take what we can get at this early gesture in black radio. And I think it's, again, we should call it what it is. It's not black radio, it's urban radio. So there still hasn't been a black radio station in Toronto. When there is, we will all feel it and know it. But everyone is standing and hiding behind the title of urban because they're not proud to be black. They want to. They think it's more righteous to not see color right now. Again, it's a kind of a washed out generation. I was raised with a level of consciousness, so I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my blackness. But now it's like, don't talk about it, and maybe you'll get promoted a little faster or something like that. So, you know, I have a very, what's the word? I'm more critical when it comes to the area of radio because, like I said, I've been denied an opportunity to be a professional commercial radio broadcaster myself. It wasn't in my path, but I think if I did, I'd probably be frustrated with some of the same things that commercial radio station broadcasters of color are frustrated with now. You can make more noise and be more influential on a non-commercial radio station than you probably can on a commercial radio station right now, because there you can have a little more freedom to play what you want, do what you want, and say what you want.
And not to mention that just Spotify and Apple Music has just upended the whole thing, you know, and people can and SoundCloud, people can access any kind of music they want.
Well, we're in the age
now
of immediate gratification now, so I guess that's the irony of the whole thing is radio's struggling for its own survival right now, not just urban radio, but urban radio is in particular, though, because we're in that age where you can get what you want right now. Think of any song.
Yeah. While Toronto hip hop and R&B artists are among the biggest hip hop, biggest pop artists in the entire world.
Mm-hmm. The few that have squeezed through the bottleneck, yeah. But then there's another 100,000 that's not being heard that are really, really good.
Yeah.
That's the irony. We need more than Justin and Drake and The Weeknd to be in that bottleneck. You know what I mean? There's more talent. So why can't Canadian radio stand behind it? Trust me, if tomorrow an American radio station started playing one Canadian artist over and over and over, all of a sudden we'd be like, hey, maybe we should be doing the same thing. But we should be doing that first,
Tales all this time.
They live here. They need our support.
Yeah.
You know, come on. Out of all the songs that have been put out, don't tell me that there hasn't been a single song that didn't deserve to be championed like that.
Okay, but radio aside, like I am struck by a couple of things here. One is that you were telling me you have to go to New York to track down hip hop records and bring them back
in the 80s.
You told me stories about like we were bringing up all these big New York American artists and we were Canadian artists. We didn't really know what our identity was, but all of a sudden we realized we had patois. All of a sudden we realized we were able to offer something different. I'll say it again. You went from that. And like, who else is going to promote these concerts? Me, I guess I'll do it. To Toronto artists being the biggest hip hop and R&B artists in the world.
Took a long time, though.
Remarkable, though.
Yeah, I mean, these kids today, they didn't live through the suffering age, right? They weren't there during that sufferation period. But think how hard it is for your morale. I mean, some artists missed their opportunity because they got old in those 15 years that went by where there were no Canadian records being made or none that were made that were making noise, you know, just the whole fascination period. It was not a good time for Canadian confidence. One of the greatest examples of that was in 1988, I put out a record myself, and I was a radio broadcaster called B-Boy Destruction. But even though, you know, it was a small record, only 1,000 copies made or whatever, and it was really made for political reasons, I look back now and I say, where were all the other artists? Because I don't remember what else came out that year on vinyl that was made in Canada. And that was 1988, and that wasn't so long ago in my head anyway. So at that time, I'm telling you, a lot of Canadian artists were great. They were spitting lyrics. They had rhymes and stuff like that, but we're all scared to put records out because we didn't know how to do it.
And the Canadian music industry had no support for you whatsoever. Canadian record labels
the whole...
turned down Deborah Cox, for God's sake. Like they had no, you know, there was no support. The Junos had no support. The CBC had no support for you know, like it wasn't just that these artists didn't believe in themselves.
It had to evolve, yes. But there wasn't, whether it was where to go to get your record pressed, getting a proper engineer, you know, there was a few people who understood. Even the record labels at the time, they really didn't have people there who were qualified to know the streets. I remember Quality Records was maybe the first record label to try releasing rap music, and it was more like a compilation album experiment when they put the Fat Boys and Houdini on their Kings of Rap album. And it was such an innocent time that they couldn't find any rappers in the whole city. So guess what? They called a guy on the radio, Ron Nelson, said, look, we need some guys to rap at some of the malls around Toronto, and it's to promote this King of Rap album. Can you find us any rappers? So me and Maestro and another guy, we basically got hired by Quality Records to go to the malls and rap there on the sidewalk as people are coming in hoping that they would buy a copy of this Kings of Rap album. And all I remember was white people seeing rap for the first time in their lives. They'd heard about it. They knew Rapper's Delight, but the fascination from something so simple, they'd never seen it before. Canadian record labels had never touched rap music at the time.
Oh, well, and they didn't. They continue. I'll just say it again. Like they continued not to. They continued not to.
It took a while, right?
And I'll say it again that the story of these artists maybe not believing themselves was coupled with the fact that there was not an industry given to them so that they could believe in themselves. There was not an industry that wanted them. There was not an industry that supported them in this country, and they had to go to the States.
Well, the talent was there, and yes, we didn't understand the culture enough. So if he didn't go to the States, I mean, even Maestro went to the States and had to humble himself and work as a security guard just to get out of Canada. And I would say most of the artists, even up until the 90s, that were rap artists that were signed in Canada, were signed by U.S. labels. We still didn't have the balls to recognize the talent and believing in ourselves enough to say, I'm going to sign these guys.
And also it was institutional racism. Also it was these labels.
That can go in that's a whole different interview, yes.
But that is also
yes,
what
it's one of the undertones and undercurrents, absolutely.
Let's talk about your album.
Sure.
Putting out this album, I know it's something you wanted to do for a long time. What made you want to, why now?
Well, actually, I didn't want to do an album for a long time. I'd never thought of putting out an album, but the pandemic came and I had some free time and I started playing with this program called FL Studio. And then I realized, hey, I used to be an engineer in a recording studio in one of the first hip hop studios. And I started having so much fun that one day it came to me, I should make a song. And then that changed because I started making many songs. And then I'm like, hey, I can make an album. And at that point, I was really trying to find myself. I was trying to do something that would make me kind of make the most out of this time during the pandemic, because a lot of people shifted their whole mindset during that period of time, including myself. So with all the isolation and stuff, I was able just to get into a groove and kind of almost by fluke started believing that, I could actually make an album. So I tell that to people, oh yeah, who's going to be rapping on it? So, no, I'm going to be rapping on it. You? Yeah, okay, cool. So people are waiting because they don't really see it. They don't really see, you see me, you don't see a rap artist. So the story is, I'm 60 years old. Try and think of how many rappers you have in your collection that are 60. Not many. People aren't supposed to rap at my age.
Well, let me talk about that, because I got to talk to Black Thought recently, Black Thought of the Roots, and I asked him this question, and I want to ask you as well, and we'll talk about some of the songs in a second.
Sure.
But do you think that enough space is being made in hip hop catering to an older hip hop audience?
No. I think it's a great opportunity for me and anybody else who wants to do such that. Hip hop, as I said, it's really young people's music, so it's going to be an experiment to find out if there really is a market. But now it's a global market. There has to be a market. You could put out a lousy record, there's guaranteed a few people will like it, So when I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a rap album. But lyrically, I can't write like these young people. I can't say anything that they say almost, because I'm not 20 anymore. I'm not 19. I'm not 18, 17. Like, I'm 60. The world is different for me than it is for them. And I don't think I should ever want to be like anybody else anyway, other than being myself. So as a result, I kind of play with this, but I say to people, you know what? I'm going to be one of the only rappers catering to that 50 and over market. Rappers haven't turned old yet. We haven't seen that. Rap is still relatively new. So we haven't seen the rapper in the wheelchair or the rappers with the gray hair and the beards and stuff like that. But guess what? The audience that has grown up with rap now, they are older. And when I go to my barber, for example, he plays strictly old school. One of the things that I realize is that no one has tried to cater to that. And excuse my ignorance, maybe I'm wrong, but to me, the oldest rapper that's still active is Chuck D from Public Enemy, 62. I don't know who's older than that. I can't find another Canadian rapper who is 60 years old and still trying to put up music right now. So I'm going against the odds because I don't feel my age. Hip hop has given me this youthfulness where I've got a lot of energy in me. I've got 4 decades of contribution to this industry that's qualified me to have something to say that might appeal to a market that is non-youth and maybe a little more grown up. Because guess what? When you grow up, you start caring about other things. You watch more news, you watch more CNN and more CP24, and you listen to more CBC, for example. You want a little more intellectual rigor, right? So you don't want to hear the same crap over and over again because that's their identity. That's their world. You can't take it from them. You can say, yo, your music's not as good as my music from the old school, but you have no right to say that because it's subjective, right? This is their life.
But he made the point that the way that rock audiences and white audiences venerate bands like the Eagles, and the Eagles can still play to 30,000, 40,000 people, and Pink Floyd can still play to 30,000, 40,000 people, and Led Zeppelin can still play to if they got back together, would play to 30,000, 40,000 people per venue. He said to me, like, I don't see that in hip hop. I don't see the same veneration for older, like the same. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
right?
It's like playing in Las Vegas, and if you build you know why he's saying that though. I kind of get why he's saying that, but we don't know. Nobody knows the answer yet because, like I said, we haven't seen hip hop get old. We don't know if there's a loyalty from the fan base and the music buying base that's gonna want to go and see those artists in their older age when they are more seasoned, right? They may not have the same skills as before. They may not. It's not like making dance music or pop music where, you could kind of regenerate the same kind of poppy flavor years and years down the line. Hip hop is more...
It's physical.
It's physical. It's political. You know what I mean? It's a measurement of, or a sign of the time that you live in. But I think that's an interesting question because I'm waiting to see what happens as well when these artists get older and they look around and they see all these other genres making money because they can bring back that old school now. Yeah, remember when you were 20, this was the music of your life? Well, what's going to happen to us when we turn 60 and we want the music of our lives? So whatever you were listening to between the age of 12 to age 18, that's probably the music of your life. Those are the artists that you're going to see. Are they going to be around still with the ability to kick rhymes and jump around on stage and do all that cardiovascular stuff? We don't know yet. They may not be in that good shape at that time.
You're looking pretty good shape to me. Can you tell me about Roach on the Wall on this record?
So DJ X and I are good friends, and he produced the track, and he was always trying to instill in me that, Ron, man, you got to do something more like Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. He says, I understand you more than your other producers understand you because I've grown up with you. So I know you have this little side to you that's just a little more, funny, and, you don't have to sound hardcore or anything. So I'm like, yeah, okay, you think so, eh? So I challenged him to making another song called Born in Jamaica, and he got that flavor exactly right. So I said, you know what? Do me another song, and I have lyrics for it already. So basically, I'm the roach on the wall, and that comes from a little Jamaican thing, well, we won't talk about that too much, but there's a little bit of Jamaican. There's this song in Jamaica called Friday Evening where it says, Bim, kill him, it's a Friday evening. And then they basically, I change it up now. The roach on the wall is symbolic of myself being an artist who is, something that maybe people don't want at this point in time, because I found that while doing this album, I've reached out to certain artists and they just didn't get back to me. And they're artists that sometimes I've supported over the years and stuff, people who belong in the album. So I felt kind of dissed and stuff, and in the song I'm talking about them let me, through that circle and stuff like that. But basically it's an analogy as if to say that the roach is also a survivor through time, right? We haven't been able to get rid of the roach yet. And so I'm going to be that roach on the wall. It's let the motherfucker crawl. And, they ain't going to catch me if I fall anyway, So I think my favorite lyric in the song is that where I say, people my age don't rap, they retire. But I'm here to inspire. So aim, shoot, fire. It means that I'm here whether you like it or not. And I'm going to bring my own style, my own flavor. Fortunately, I'm like I said, in a position where even though people may not like my style or my tone or my patter as an artist, I still have the right to contribute because of what I've done in this music. No one can say, Ron, you shouldn't make an album because I've earned the right to make it. So I don't know if there's going to be a future for me as an artist, but I'll tell you, I'm enjoying doing this, and it's been a lot of fun, and hopefully I'll be able to put out more albums.
Can you tell me about Culture Pirate on the record? What were you trying to get across in that song? Tell me a little,
Well, it's very easy to understand that black people started rock and roll, or we had our foot in the door, but there was a time that people probably have heard about where there are people like Elvis Presley around, and because of the racist institutions that existed back then, when you were a black artist making great music, you weren't able to benefit from it by having it released and distributed properly because you were black. But at the same time, people like Elvis were legally able to come along, watch you perform, and then go and recreate that music and then put it out themselves and not give proper credit where credit is due. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole history that people don't know. So that song is basically trying to say, look, in this song here, I've named a lot of popular song titles, right? And I hope it upsets them a little bit because it's not quite plagiarism, but I'm trying to say that it's only rock and roll, but we started that. The ink was white, but the page was black. Et cetera, et cetera. We're taking a little bit back from everyone who's culture pirated in the history of music.
I mean, but you've been around for so much of the history of this music, I just want to close like this. It's the 40th anniversary of your Fantastic Voyage radio show. It's the 50th anniversary of hip-hop's birth. And you are officially hitting your 60s.
It's my 60th year.
What crosses your mind when you think about all these milestones?
I wish I had some money as a result of doing all of that stuff, but I think money is still a bit of a struggle for me right now. So it's nice to have accolades, but I measure success partly with, in the end, achieving some financial success as well and playing your cards right and stuff. I'm not saying I haven't had the opportunity to make good money, and I'm not saying I'm broke either, but I'm just saying that in this position, the only thing that's missing is a cherry on the top, and that would be a little financial security in my life, because I can do what I do because I don't have financial security. The reason that I can rap is because I have these things that are, giving me pain and struggle that I block. Keeping your nose above water is that I can do that, right? But all my friends and peers and stuff, they're standing on the water, they're walking on water, but I'm here in this I'm that roach, you know what I mean? I'm still struggling to get through, and I've been honored over the last 5 years, especially with a lot of people, congratulating me on having done this and done that, because they've grown up now and
recognizing
stuff like that.
What you've done.
Yeah, so it's great to get the recognition, but before it's all said and done and I get really old, I'd like to just have a little peace of mind at some stage and be able to go on a vacation and relax and not think about my bills and stuff like that. So I'm just keeping it real. A lot of people, they pretend. I ain't pretending. I'm not ashamed of my current status or anything like that. I'm 60 now. I've only had one job in my life, and that was teaching at York University. You know, and that lasted for 11 years. So for all those other years, I was on the streets, and I survived. You know, I'm on my third property right now, so it's not all like negative, but I want to see at some point in time a bright light shine, if you want to put it that way. But in the meantime, I think that one of the qualifications for an artist to put out an album like I put out is from being in the dark, not in the light. So hopefully you'll listen to the album and you'll understand and appreciate that.
I got to tell you, man, like just getting to, it's a great honor to get the chance to talk to you, to be honest.
Thank you.
We've been looking forward to talking to you for a long time. I'm really happy you were so honest there about, you know, that like we can give all the accolades that we want. We can give all the honors that we want. There's a reality associated with that.
Of course,
I'm glad you talked about that. And I just want to thank you for everything you've done, because the work that you did in the early days in Toronto hip hop has helped the country grow into the cultural powerhouse that it is right now. And thanks for coming in and talking to me about it.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thanks for supporting my album and my legacy.